to let everybody join in. Yes, and as you see, this webinar is being recorded, and I'll talk about a couple housekeeping items in a couple minutes here, but just for your reference, so you can accept that, because it'll be posted on our Salmon-Safe YouTube playlist. So if you really enjoy the webinar and you want to watch it again, you can definitely do that, or see some of the other webinars that we've posted in the past as well. All right, Molly, I can't see the time. Do you know exactly what time we're at?
We're at 12 o'clock exactly.
Okay, fantastic then. You can keep letting participants in, but I'll just go ahead and get started. So thank you everyone for joining us today for our webinar showcasing the Shuswap Watershed Council's Phosphorus Action Plan. My name is Andrea McDonald, and I am the program lead with Salmon-Safe BC. And I have joining in the audience today our program manager, Teresa Fresco, and our speakers, Steve Litke, the director of water programs at the Fraser Basin Council, and Aaron Vieira, the associate regional manager for the Thompson Okanagan region, and Molly Hunt, who's also helping out with some Zoom logistics and also works with the FBC flood team. I'm calling in today from the unceded traditional territories of the Squamish Nation, and we encourage you to recognize the land that you're calling in from today, whether you'd like to note that in the chat or reflect on it personally, as Indigenous peoples are the original and long-term stewards of these lands that we're so grateful to live and farm on. So for this webinar, we ask folks to remain muted for the entirety of the presentation. You were muted when you came in, so you don't have to press any buttons. And we ask that you only unmute to engage in discussion during the question period at the end. You're welcome to keep your video on as long as you'd like. It is being recorded and will be posted on our Salmon-Safe YouTube playlist, but we do encourage you to keep your video on. It's always nice for our presenters to be able to see people's faces, especially during the question period as well. So I'm going to hand it off to Steve in a second here, but just providing a bit of FBC's water-related programming work background, which links Salmon-Safe and the Shuswap Watershed Council's objectives kind of under the mission of the Fraser Basin Council. And then following Steve, I'll provide an overview of the Salmon-Safe BC program, and then I'll hand it off to Aaron to share the Shuswap Watershed Council, or SWC's Phosphorus Action Plan. And we should wrap up around 12:45 for questions. So if you need to leave before that, you can feel free to post your questions in the chat, and we can try and get a verbal response during the webinar or in the recording so you can see it that way, or we can send out written responses following the webinar as well. So I'm going to pause my sharing and hand it off to Steve.
Thanks very much, Andrea. It's a real pleasure to be here. Like Andrea, I also have the privilege of welcoming you to this webinar. My name is Steve Litke. I'm the Director of Water Programs with the Fraser Basin Council, and I'm speaking to you from the unceded ancestral lands of the Squamish, Musqueam, and Tsleil-Waututh nations, and I'm very grateful to be living and working in these territories. It's a real pleasure to be able to join you today and share a little bit about the water and watershed-related work that the Fraser Basin Council has been involved in over the years. For those who don't already know, the Fraser Basin Council is a non-governmental organization with a mandate to advance sustainability in BC. And one of the three priorities in our 5-year strategic plan, actually 3 of the last 5-year strategic plans, has been to support healthy watersheds and water resources. And we've got 3 objectives under that strategic priority. One is to increase the sustainability of watersheds through improved planning and management. Second is to improve watershed health, including water quality and fish and wildlife habitat. And the third is to increase community resilience and reduce vulnerability to coastal and river flood hazards. So a very broad scope of work. And we undertake this work in many ways at many different scales. And our primary roles are as an educator and as an impartial convener and facilitator of multi-jurisdictional and multi-interest processes. Because we're not a government organization with any regulatory role or legislative authority, that positions us well to be that impartial facilitator and bring together different interests. One of our earliest successes when it comes to water quality was helping to resolve acid mine drainage at the former Britannia mine in Howe Sound. And this was once the largest acid mine pollution problem in all of North America. And after many years of work and the establishment of a treatment plant and diverting the contaminated runoff through the treatment plant, salmon had returned to Britannia Creek. At the province-wide scale, we've developed several guidance resources on topics such as collaborative watershed governance and ways to integrate climate change into different water and watershed planning processes. Also at the province-wide scale, the Fraser Basin Council, on behalf of the province of BC, we're coordinating a floodplain mapping initiative. And there are 5 regional scale mapping projects currently underway with more to come. And this is vital information to help communities better understand, plan, and prepare for the flood hazards that they're exposed to, including the potential impacts of a changing climate on those flood hazards. At the regional scale, we've long facilitated watershed roundtables in different regions of BC. Some current examples include the Nechako Watershed Roundtable, the Horsefly River Roundtable, and the Shuswap Watershed Council, which you'll hear more about. And we're also doing some really important work with others in the Cultus Lake area in the Lower Mainland. And these initiatives recognize the importance of a stewardship ethic and a collaborative and holistic approach to addressing the complex challenges facing streams, lakes, and watersheds overall. And these initiatives also recognize the fundamental importance of managing human activities on the land and in the water if we're going to successfully protect and improve the health of aquatic ecosystems and the habitats that they sustain. Ultimately, healthy watersheds also require action at the local scale and even the individual property level. And again, both of these initiatives speak to that. So as I was reflecting on this webinar, giving it a bit of thought about both the Salmon-Safe BC program, the Shuswap Watershed Council, and the Phosphorus Action Plan, I think they relate to some of the themes that I've raised in a couple of different ways. Both of these initiatives provide guidance and educational opportunities from that local to the regional scale. Both enable and encourage action on the land to protect water quality and ecosystem health. And both involve stewardship on a voluntary basis to do more than is required by government regulations. So I think I'll leave my opening remarks at that. I look forward to learning more about both Salmon-Safe BC and the Phosphorus Action Plan, and also learning from you in the discussion that follows. So thanks again, Andrea, for the invitation, and I'll pass it back to you. Oh, you're muted, Andrea.
Sorry about that. Of course. So yeah, anyway, thank you, Steve. And as Steve mentioned, Salmon-Safe BC is a program hosted by the Fraser Basin Council. The program was launched in British Columbia back in 2011, which is over 10 years ago. So pretty exciting for us, a big milestone, and was initially launched under the leadership of the Pacific Salmon Foundation in partnership with the Fraser Basin Council. And then in 2018, Salmon-Safe BC was fully transitioned over to the Fraser Basin Council, and we now solely deliver all of the programs under Salmon-Safe BC. The program actually began in Oregon and was founded by the Pacific Rivers Council in 1996 and is now active across Washington, Oregon, California, and British Columbia, and is delivered by a network of partners, as you can see on the screen here, including the Fraser Basin Council. So Salmon-Safe BC is an eco-certification program that recognizes transformative land and water management practices. And we have a number of certification programs. And today I'm going to primarily be focusing on our farms program. And we do have, this is a second webinar in our series focusing on agriculture. So we will post links to as well in a follow-up email to our other webinars so you can learn more about our agriculture program. But we do have certification standards for parks and natural areas, urban developments, campuses, infrastructure, and we also have accreditation for construction, developer, and designer firms that are looking to incorporate Salmon-Safe principles into their practices at more of an organization level. So I also wanted to touch on the direct linkage between Salmon-Safe BC and the Shuswap Watershed Council's P Action Plan. So Salmon-Safe is a voluntary program for landowners and operators seeking to incorporate more sustainable management practices. It can be used as a tool to promote sustainable nutrient management in a way that can maximize the benefit to farms and minimize the impact on its surrounding environment. So Salmon-Safe uses a suite of nature-based approaches to achieve this through our certification process. Eligible farmers and operators can also learn sustainable practices that can benefit the farm productivity of the ecosystem long-term. By voluntarily participating in Salmon-Safe, farms are recognized for their actions that achieve the 7 standards outlined here on the screen. As the program takes a whole farm approach, it doesn't just focus on nutrient management, but it finds ways to enhance the entire landscape, which in turn lends itself to sustainable nutrient management and then healthier watersheds overall. So our standards include first, optimizing water use, and this is often done through things like water capture and reuse, drip irrigation, or microjets under the canopy. This standard also encourages sustainable water use that doesn't cause withdrawal from the water courses on site or nearby, which are really critical for aquatic life and especially important in times of climate change where some of regions across BC are experiencing prolonged and more intensive drought. We also focus on managing erosion and sediment control. So this is often done through setting a healthy riparian buffer where possible to provide filtration of water before it leaves the site, limiting exposure of bare soils to potential water runoff, proactively stabilizing erosion-prone areas, and then also implementing things like no-till approaches where possible. We focus on an integrated pest management approach. Of course, it is kind of a main discussion point for today's webinar and focuses on a holistic approach to management of the site and operation. And this means finding sustainable ways to reduce the use of pesticides or added chemicals that can protect water quality. This can be done in a number of ways. Some creative ways incorporate including birds of prey that can manage pest populations, or ensuring native plants that can provide habitat for healthy populations of beneficial insects as well. We also focus on animal management, and this is of course only applicable to sites where animals are present, which we do have a couple farms that are certified that do have animals on them. And this means that the animals on site are not adding additional stress to the ecosystem. So they're kept out of the highly sensitive habitats, their waste is properly managed, and we make sure especially that riparian and stream habitats are protected from them entering. The last 3 standards kind of work together, so I'm going to talk about them all as one. So the landscape level biodiversity, protecting and restoring in-stream habitat, as well as riparian and wetland areas. So Salmon-Safe really encourages a regenerative agriculture approach that can use sustainable approaches like cover crops to introduce more biodiversity on site and more. And there is a growing body of evidence that agriculture really benefits from greater biodiversity across the entire landscape. So the soil microfauna such as bacteria and fungi really break down the organic matter and help maintain the quality of the soil and recycle nutrients better. And having healthy streams on site means that salmon can come back and introduce more nutrients into the ecosystem as well, and provide a buffer to provide better water quality protection as well. So I wanted to provide a visual example also of what Salmon-Safe actually looks like in practice. The idea behind the standards that were developed based on the biological needs of salmon is that by achieving one of the standards, you're ultimately going to accomplish goals outlined under the other standard categories as well. And by this, I mean, if you're introducing things like native plants on site, you're probably going to be using a lot less water because they're drought tolerant and adapted to the native environment. You're probably going to use less nutrients as well, added nutrients and pesticides on site. Plants are also going to stabilize the soil and reduce erosion and provide habitat and increase biodiversity and ecosystem health overall. So these photos on the screen were taken from our recently certified BC Transit Handy Dart site in View Royal, which showcases how an integrated and holistic approach is applied through a salmon-safe lens. And they also have successfully counted 27 salmonids in their restored stream channel recently, which is really exciting. And although this is an urban site, the principles and practices on this site easily translate and are applicable to an agriculture setting as well. And the standards are not prescriptive, but they rather focus on the needs of the site specifically, so they can be adapted to whatever site we're looking at. And here you can see the in-stream habitat protection and restoration that's taken place both in-stream and in the riparian area. And this includes stabilizing the bank of the stream, creating more habitat for beneficial organisms, reducing the need for added nutrients, construction of the new stream channel, and restoration of the existing streams. And this includes riffles and pools. That adds complexity to the channel, provides habitat through coarse woody debris, supplies oxygen and to the water, and also refuge for aquatic species. They've also removed a lot of invasive species on site using an integrated pest management approach to replant with natives and reduce the likelihood of reintroduction of invasives, protecting the buffer zone of the riparian area to act as a filter for water runoff from the site before it enters into the stream, and ensuring adequate shading through canopy cover and introduction of leaf litter and other organic materials that would naturally occur in a stream. So overall, the standards aim to enhance the existing ecosystem on site and benefit from a more nature-based approach. Currently, we have roughly 12 certified vineyards and 13 farms across BC, as you can see on the map here. And these folks are all incredible champions of the program and really great examples that showcase how agriculture can be done in an ecologically minded way that doesn't necessarily have to compromise the economic benefits of farming. And we also have 2 certified operators in close proximity to the Shuswap Watershed at Monte Creek Winery and Left Field Farms as well, which are both great champions as well. If you or someone you know would like to learn more about Salmon-Safe, you can scan this QR code on the screen, or we can, at the end, we'll also post our link to our website so you can inquire about certification. We're happy to talk to farmers as well as interested organizations to learn more about the program, how they can start, or how they could participate as well, or incorporate the standards into their practices. So I'd like to introduce today's speaker, Erin Vieira. Erin is the Associate Regional Manager for the Fraser Basin Council's Thompson-Okanagan region. She's been with FBC since 2007 and has nearly 20 years experience in natural resource program management, planning, community engagement, education, and facilitation. Erin is FBC's lead person on the Shuswap Watershed Council, which is a watershed-based partnership to maintain and enhance water quality in the Shuswap watershed. And in this role, Erin developed, leads, and facilitates several collaborative initiatives for water quality monitoring, reporting, protection, improvement, as well as aquatic invasive species prevention, safe boating and water-based recreation, community engagement, and advocacy. And Erin has her degree in natural resource science from Thompson Rivers University, and she's here today to talk to us about the Shuswap Watershed Council's Phosphorus Action Plan. So I'll stop sharing my screen and pass it away to Erin.
Thank you, Andrea. Thanks for the introduction, and good afternoon, everyone. I'm pleased to be joining you today. I'm in my office in Kamloops, calling in from the unceded territories of Tecumloops, Jessiquetam. And I'm going to go ahead and share my screen because I do have a little slide deck here to talk to you about the Shuswap Watershed and about our recently published Phosphorus Action Plan. All right, that looks good on my end. Yep, thanks, Andrea. All right, so let's get started. I thought I'd actually begin just acknowledging that there's people in this webinar from across the province and maybe even beyond BC, but I thought I would start with a little intro on the Shuswap Watershed. So it is within Secwepemcúlecw, the unceded territories of the Secwepem peoples. The watershed itself is about 2.5 times the size of Prince Edward Island, but Shuswap Lake is about 310 kilometers squared. And I have a little map on the next slide. And don't quote me on this, but I believe there's about 1,400 kilometers of shorelines, and Shuswap Lake is a bit of a wonky H, so there's a lot of shoreline relative to the surface area of the lake. And the Shuswap is known for its pristine water, its beautiful undeveloped shorelines and beaches. It really is a jewel in BC. It's just an incredible lake. It's the source of drinking water for several communities, Salmon Arm, Sicamous, downstream all the way to Chase and Kamloops, and even further down the Thompson. It's the nursery watershed for 4 species of Pacific salmon, and there's a number of other fish species as well, and a whole host of different animals and plants. And it has to be acknowledged that the tourism economy and the recreation values are, you can't really put a price on it. The lake is the centerpiece for the regional tourism economy, and it's what's known by the residents the center of the shoe lifestyle. And if you want to get a sense of what I'm talking about, you can just open up Instagram and search out hashtags I love Shuswap or Shuswap Lake or something like that. So in the Shuswap watershed ultimately drains into the Thompson River and then the Fraser into the Pacific. So this is a map of the watershed. The pink polygon is the boundary of the watershed. So all of the land, the creeks, the rivers, the meadows, they all drain through any of the large lakes, the Shuswap River, the Salmon River, ultimately to the outlet of the watershed, which is at Chase, where it flows into the South Thompson River. And just to give you a bit of perspective in BC, the Shuswap watershed forms kind of that southeast blob of yellow in the BC map that's shown in the upper part of my screen. So a bit of information now on the Shuswap Watershed Council before we dive into the P Action Plan. The Watershed Council, basically it exists as a single table to facilitate collaboration and coordination of several different organizations and agencies about water quality. As we're all aware, water is a very complex resource to manage. It doesn't abide by jurisdictional boundaries at all. It flows in all kinds of directions, and there's a huge number of organizations and agencies that have a role in managing different aspects of water quality and watersheds. And so the council is a table to facilitate collaboration. It's also an organization to lead strategic initiatives that aren't done by other agencies necessarily, but that can be initiated by this collaborative table. So some of the strategic initiatives that we worked on in the past include research, special water quality monitoring projects, and of course, developing the P Action Plan. The council is also an organization to engage with the province and others. And that's just acknowledging that the province, as Steve mentioned earlier, they have the largest regulatory role in managing the watershed. And so the Watershed Council is a single table for the province to come to talk about issues and concerns. And the council advocates on behalf of those interests in the watershed. This is a list of all the different organizations and folks that make up the Watershed Council. There are 3 regional districts at the table, and that's the Columbia Shuswap, the Thompson-Nicola, and the North Okanagan regional districts. There are 2 municipalities, Salmon Arm and Sicamous, at the table. The Sequatlam Nation has 2 seats at the table currently, and there are 3 provincial agencies. And so all of these organizations have anywhere from 1 to 5 representatives attending. And this is all laid out in terms of reference that we have. We also have community representatives who are appointed to the Shuswap Watershed Council through a process of expressions of interest and review. And we also have the senior scientific advisor. So in total, I believe there are 20 members currently, but up to 22 seats. And the Fraser Basin Council is where I come in. The Fraser Basin is a provincial non-government organization, and we provide staff support to the Shuswap Watershed Council. So that's myself and my colleague, Alex Deschantel, and we're both based in Kamloops in our Thompson region. So what is the water quality in the Shuswap? I mentioned earlier that it's long been known for pristine water quality, beautiful clear water, lovely beaches. But in recent years, there have been some issues coming to light. This photo is taken by a resident in the Tappan area who I believe is actually on the call today. She went out on her boat this summer during a large algal bloom and collected this sample. And that unfortunately is what the Salmon Arm Bay looked like for about 6 weeks this summer. It was very thick with an algae bloom. 2022 isn't the only time this has happened recently. There was also a large bloom in 2020. And so to have 2 blooms in 3 years is really concerning for residents, for visitors, and certainly for the Shuswap Watershed Council. So we know that phosphorus is one of the key drivers of algal blooms, not just here, but around the world. And we've found that nutrient loading from agricultural lands and urban areas, especially in the Shuswap River and the Salmon River area draining into the lakes, are the largest sources of nutrients. And not only is an algal bloom obviously very unsightly, it has a hampering effect on recreation and enjoyment of the lake, but there's concern that blue-green algae blooms can become toxic. That wasn't the case in the 2 blooms that happened recently, but the potential is there for blue-green algae to produce microcystin toxin, and that's dangerous to people, pets, and livestock. And if algae blooms continue to happen and they become toxic, it will have huge impacts on our economy, on that regional tourism economy I mentioned, and on the quality of life for residents. So a little bit of background information on phosphorus. It's a non-replaceable, non-renewable mineral resource. It's essential to many forms of life and for supporting ecosystems. So it's an important part of the ecosystem in the lake. It's essential to agriculture and food security, but phosphorus reserves are limited, and there's concern from that standpoint that when phosphorus washes off of soils and off the landscape into water, it's essentially wasted and hard to get it back into an agricultural or a soil cycling situation. So additionally, when phosphorus enters an aquatic ecosystem, it's what we call a limiting nutrient. And so the current levels of phosphorus, say in Shuswap Lake, they are holding back the development of plant life or algae. So in other words, if you have a little bit of P, you will have a little bit of plant life, or a set amount of plant life and algae. But as soon as you add more P, the plant life will increase accordingly. And so P is really the driving factor here, not other nutrients. To further complicate the situation, phosphorus, it can wash off the landscape, but it can also build up in soils. And it's suspected that that's happened in agricultural areas over the decades around the world. And this is something referred to as legacy phosphorus. And if you're interested in learning more about the effects of phosphorus on aquatic life, there's been some great work done by Dr. David Schindler, who was a renowned Canadian scientist who did work in the experimental lakes area, pardon me, in northwestern Ontario. So a Google search might point you to some of the work that he did, and his work ultimately led to some reform in Canadian regulations around how P is managed. So something that the Shuswap Watershed Council wanted to do, acknowledging, the extreme importance of phosphorus in Shuswap Lake and the fact that it's a limiting nutrient, we wanted to understand this better and derive some management implications from it. So we partnered with UBC Okanagan, starting back in 2016, to better understand the load of nutrients coming off the landscape into Shuswap and Mara Lakes. So essentially what the research team did was they created what's called a phosphorus budget. So they were able to ascertain how much the levels of phosphorus change in the large rivers as it flows through the landscape and then enters Shuswap and Mirror Lake. And what the results found are that agricultural and urban areas, especially in those valley bottoms of those two rivers I mentioned, the Shuswap River and the Salmon River, they are contributing the highest proportions of nutrients to the lake. So even though it's a fairly small area, a small land area in the watershed, it's contributing a very significant amount of the overall load as compared to the uplands of the watershed, which are mostly forested. That area constitutes a much bigger land base of the watershed, but a very small amount of nutrients. And so the results of this research created some management implications for the council, and the council being non-regulatory and having no ability to directly manage what's happening on the landscape. We realized there were two options that we could take on in our role as a collaborative roundtable. One is to provide incentives, financial incentives for different sustainable agricultural practices. And so we developed a water quality grant program. And the second piece was we realized we have a role to raise awareness and educate our residents and industry sectors about some different ideas and tips for becoming a better steward in the watershed. And so that is what led us to create the Phosphorus Action Plan. So the P Action Plan, as we call it, is a document that provides guidance to everyone in the Shuswap on actions that they can take to manage their phosphorus footprint, so to speak. And so just to be clear, it's not a regulation, it's full of ideas and best management practices and voluntary actions. And it's based on the premise that we all can play a part in this, whether we're an agriculturalist or a silviculturist, whether we're involved in building, maintaining roads, parks, lawns, gardens, if we're a homeowner choosing products and minding what we flush down drains and maintaining septic systems. And the timing of publishing this plan in October was kind of a happy coincidence because people in the Shuswap had just been through a second large algae bloom, the second in 3 years. And I think people were feeling quite motivated and they wanted to know, what can I do? I'm just a homeowner in the Shuswap. What can I do to help prevent this from happening again? Because people were pretty devastated when the algae blooms happened. So we'll dive into the contents now. I've already given you a bit of an overview and purpose of the P Action Plan, but it is laid out in the document itself, as well as some background information about phosphorus and some information about that research project that I already spoke about. The P Action Plan also contains a summary of the regulatory framework in Canada and in BC for phosphorus. And just to highlight a few here, the province certainly has the biggest responsibility in terms of the regulatory responsibilities and the different regulations that they've enacted. And forgive the acronyms on the screen here, but I'll explain them to you. AIMCOP, that's the Agricultural Environmental Management Code of Practice. So that's the provincial code that aims to ensure that agricultural practices are consistent with the provision of clean water and clean air in the province. The province also sets water quality objectives, and that's done on a water body basis. Local government regulations can have a hand in regulating phosphorus, such as through official community plans and riparian area regulations and agriculture plans or strategies. There are Indigenous laws and plans by the different Indigenous communities in the province that speak to the importance of stewarding the land and having a long-term a long-term perspective in looking after the land. And there are federal regulations, fewer at the federal level than provincially in BC, but the key one federally is called the concentration of phosphorus in cleaning products, and that regulates how much P can be in cleaning products that are produced in Canada or imported into Canada. And that kind of links back to the work of David Schindler that I mentioned earlier. So I just wanted to acknowledge too, before I go further into the P action plan, that this was created by a team at Fraser Basin, as well as lots of input from folks who live in the Shuswap. Kate Murphy and Mike Simpson, both who are former employees of Fraser Basin Council, did a lot of work into researching and writing the plan. And the Shuswap Watershed Council also has 2 technical committees that support our work. And I know there's at least a few folks from those committees on the call today, and they contributed to the development of this plan as well. So the P action plan contains, like I mentioned earlier, best management practices, recommendations, and voluntary actions for a number of different groups, including the Shuswap Watershed Council. And I've listed some of the other audience there on the slide. And we're not going to get into all of these today, but I did pick a few to go over in more detail. So for the Shuswap Watershed Council, what we've identified for ourselves in the P action plan, and one of them is to continue to offer our water quality grant program. And that's a program that provides financial assistance to farms and landowners to help them cover the costs of doing new management practices to better manage nutrients on farm or build soil health through regenerative agriculture practices. We just closed our 4th intake to the water quality grant program recently, and to date we have provided, I think, 8 different grants, mostly to farms in the Shuswap, and somewhere in the neighborhood of about $130,000. We've also identified that it would be beneficial to develop a wetland strategy for the Shuswap watershed. It's very early stages at this point. And the Watershed Council has a role in advocacy, and we've done this already previously, and it's something that I think the council will continue to do. And there's a few key things identified there, such as encouraging the province of BC to monitor compliance with that AIM COP code and the organic matter recycling regulation. We also will advocate for more funding to support improvements to wastewater treatment, because those, of course, are a point source of nutrients to the watershed. And also advocate for the province of BC to lead or provide funding support to the agriculture community for regional crop and nutrient research. So for the farms and agriculture sector, our P action plan recommends the implementation of a number of different beneficial management practices, such as conservation tillage, conservation buffers. There's a bulleted list on the screen. Also encouraging the use of regenerative agriculture practices, and Andrea talked about some of these already that Salmon-Safe endorses. We also encourage the agriculture sector to mitigate erosion and surface runoff from fields, because sometimes that water can be very nutrient rich, especially in up in the interior where we have 4 seasons. And when spring happens, there's a lot of runoff from the hillsides and from the valley bottoms into the rivers from our snow melt and our rainy season. There's also available tools such as the nutrient management calculator, the nutrient management plan. And just to clarify, these aren't developed by us, they're developed by others, but they are out there and they're available. And of course, develop an environmental farm plan or become Salmon-Safe certified. So for the forest industry, whoops, a bit stalled here. There we go. For the forest industry, we have recommended that it's important to maintain natural drainage patterns on forestry roads, and we do have a lot of those in our watershed. So proper management of culverts and bridges to ensure there are no blockages and minimize erosion. Promptly reforesting following harvesting and salvage and post-wildfire to get that soil growing again and not have exposed bare soil. And there is a number of different BMPs, beneficial management practices for riparian areas, especially on small streams. We've got a couple items identified for the transportation sector. In other words, highways. So the key one there in highway maintenance and highway development, that wetlands would not be built over, filled in, or destructed in any way. Wetlands are incredible for protecting water quality and polishing water quality. They also offer a whole suite of other environmental services, but from our perspective in this P action plan, they can act as a phosphorus sink. So keeping them intact during highway maintenance and development is really critical. Also minimizing ditch clearing where possible. And again, that's just to maintain a vegetative buffer. For homeowners, waterfront property owners and boaters, there's even a longer list in the P action plan itself, but I just chose a few to highlight today. Maintaining a septic system, if you're a rural resident, is really critical. So we're advocating that, and there's tools available from regional districts, for example, and there are professionals that can help homeowners with this. Also things like not dumping solvents down drains or storm drains, using your consumer power to choose low phosphorus products for household use, minimizing soap and lawn fertilizer runoff from your yard or your driveway to storm drains. In most parts of the Shuswap, storm drains will go directly to a water body. In some other areas, they'll go to a holding pond or essentially a built wetland where it can improve that storm water, but that's not the case with all storm drains. Some will go directly to a river or to the lake. Of course, maintaining shoreline and riparian vegetation is really important. For boaters, one of the best things we can recommend from a phosphorus perspective is to do your part to prevent erosion from your boat wake. So that's really important on rivers, and I know it's been an issue on the Shuswap River. And of course, disposing of watercraft holding tanks at a facility and not discharging to surface water. For the provincial government, Ministry of Environment is listed there first, and we've talked with them about this and we're advocating for this, but we'd like more water quality data, especially data related to nutrients collected in the Shuswap watershed. For Ministry of Forests, an action identified there is to encourage hydrologic recovery in upper watersheds. And of course, replanting has a big part of that. For Ministry of Agriculture, the action identified is that they promote, that staff there promote nutrient management with clients and support research trials in regional crop production and nutrient usage. And lastly, Ministry of Transportation and Infrastructure. Again, that piece around the wetlands, making sure they're left intact during highway development. And keeping in mind that culverts and bridges should be built to change a suit a changing climate. All right, I'm just about done with my slide deck here. So the focus for our P action plan, of course, is phosphorus, but with a lot of the actions we've identified, there will be collateral benefits, healthier riparian ecosystems, the reduced risk of erosion and property loss, reduced flood risk, reduced water treatment cost for municipalities and private utility operators, and ultimately restored wetlands and protected wetlands for habitat and water security. So in summary, eutrophication, or the move of water bodies to become more nutrient enriched, is a global issue. We're certainly not facing it alone in the Shuswap or in BC. It's concerning for a couple reasons. One is that phosphorus is a finite and valuable mineral resource. It's needed for many different applications. It's important in ecosystems, but when it's lost to aquatic and marine environments, it's essentially wasted. The good news is, at a regional scale, phosphorus is a manageable variable. Although we've made some errors in the past and even perhaps still currently, people are inventive and innovative, and there's a lot of great work happening out there. There are some really interesting and innovative case studies across North America. And so ultimately, better management of phosphorus, we think it will require a regulatory approach, but also education and awareness, incentives and financial support, and different beneficial management practices. So if you're interested in seeing the whole plan, I think it's about a 12-page document or a 16-page document. It's available on our website, shuswapwater.ca. We also have social media. You can look for us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. We have a YouTube channel, and I'm open to receiving questions and inquiries. You can contact me by email, and my address is there on the screen. So Andrea, that's the end of my presentation.
Fantastic. Thanks, Erin. Now we can open it up to questions. So I know that we have a few questions from the chat, and Teresa's here to kind of help read some of those out. But if you want to stop sharing your screen and then we can see everybody's lovely faces, folks are welcome to continue to put questions in the chat and we can read those out. And alternatively, we also invite you to raise your hand, and you can do that through the reactions button. When you click on that, you'll see raise hand, and then I can call on you to ask your question verbally to any of our speakers, really. So yeah, the floor is open. Yeah, Mike.
Hi, this is for Erin. I was curious at the start of your presentation there on the community groups that are involved, and if there's any agriculture groups there, or if that's an option.
Hi, Mike. We don't specifically have a spot for the agriculture sector. We do have a rep from the Ministry of Agriculture, and we have 4 seats for community representatives. And we have strived to have somebody from the agriculture industry selected among those community reps. So we do have someone who's part of the ag sector, but they don't necessarily come wearing an ag hat. They come with the community perspective.
Thanks. Other question, I had one more, was if there's any ongoing monitoring right now in either of the watersheds, because I kind of, the way I think of it from our farm is kind of what gets measured gets managed, and what gets managed gets improved. And if we're to make any meaningful change on our farm to our management, then we need some way of seeing the result of that. So is that, if you could speak to that?
Yeah, and so the Watershed Council doesn't do any water monitoring itself. We don't have a field program. The Ministry of Environment is the lead agency that does environmental monitoring. There's also local and regional governments have a role to play in some water quality monitoring, but the Ministry of Environment is the main one that has long-term monitoring programs on the Salmon River, the Shuswap River, and at a number of different sites on Shuswap Lake. And they do collect a number of different parameters in the water quality samples. But something that we've been asking for is for the nutrient monitoring on the water bodies to be expanded to give a bit more of a comprehensive package of data.
Thanks.
Awesome. Thanks, Mike. So I'll go to Teresa to read us one of the questions from the chat.
Sure. So we have a question from Daniel Selby from Fisheries and Oceans Canada. And his first question is, what are the primary algal groups driving the recent blooms?
I don't have that at my fingertips. I knew back in August when I was corresponding regularly with Interior Health. There were blue-green algae present. I know Dr. Selby probably wants the genera. I just don't recall. I have his email address. I can try to follow up after.
Perfect. Yeah, we can definitely get a follow-up for that. Okay, we'll go back and forth. So I'll go to Kelsey and then we'll go back to Teresa from the chat.
Awesome, thank you. I'm actually calling from Alberta. So definitely not just a BC issue. We always hear it's an Alberta lake thing. So it's definitely everywhere. Sorry, I had to jump in halfway. I was kind of curious about the taking action. Do you guys, being in an advisory document, do you have recommendations for like setbacks or like for like developers to kind of create like a riparian buffer, or do you guys work around policy at all?
We haven't been that prescriptive with the P action plan. No.
Thanks for the question, Kelsey. And I'll also say too, in terms of recommendations, Salmon-Safe does have our standards, and they're also not prescriptive, they're voluntary, but they do have recommendations in terms of buffers, especially for agriculture production as well. Awesome. Okay, we'll go to Teresa from the chat.
Great. So we have a question from Mohammed Dokrat. What are the major goals for this coming year, which would be considered successes?
I'm not sure if that's specific to, uptake of the P action plan, or if that question is more general for the Watershed Council.
Mohammed, don't know if you can unmute to clarify.
Yes, it's actually for both. I'd be interested both on the phosphorus action and the general watershed.
Yeah, so in terms of success for the P action plan, we can only be responsible for the items that we've identified for ourselves. And so the key one there would be the water quality grant program. So we're looking to ensure we can have, maximize the success of that program. And what that would look like would be, I think, a few different attributes. One would be a pretty solid awareness in the community that these grant funds are available. We've just had the fourth round. And at this point, we're still not sure if there's a general awareness of this grant program because we're not really inundated with applications yet. Secondly, we'd be looking for really strong leveraging of the grant funds that we offer. So we have about an annual budget of $55,000 to $60,000 for grant funds, but we'd like to see those leveraged at least 2 times to maximize the investment in restoring different areas of the watershed. So I would say that's the main one for us in the P action plan. Advocacy would be number 2, to see the Watershed Council having an active role in advocating for change and more monitoring in the watershed. I could probably talk about some other goals related to the watersheds plans for the upcoming year, but they're not as related to the P action plan. So maybe best for offline.
Perfect. Thanks, Sharon. Wonderful. We'll go to Barbara. Sorry, Barbara, are you able to unmute?
Good, Barb.
technological Luddite here.
You're good. Don't
I'm
worry.
located on the shores of Shuswap Lake, and if you see by my backdrop here that we've experienced some of the algal blooms that Aaron has mentioned. And thanks, Aaron, for having this today. It's great to get together with everyone. I know my questions lay around where water quality meets some of the forest management. We've had a shift in some of the forest practices, and David Eby had made a fairly significant announcement yesterday. And so there's shifts in the forest planning to include landscape values. And of course, this is happening over time. And there is a relationship, of course, between water and land. So I guess my question is to everyone in the room around what people, where this goes in terms of water quality management and fitting in those values to the forest landscape planning. And we have, and I agree with Mike's comment about measuring what matters, and we have significant impacts from things like development, tourism impacts that are quite heavy, and growing, of course, because people are looking to move into smaller communities. So measuring impacts on the land, I think, are fairly significant. With the municipal natural assets initiative here, they've published a study in January 2023, and it speaks to some of the policy differences and gaps that revolve around managing natural assets. It's quite interesting. It came out in January, and this was at the request, I believe, of the provincial government. It's quite interesting, but it speaks to some of the gaps and the needing for measure and the needing for connection and alignment of policies and Indigenous values, etc. So there's lots of stuff I've just packed into everything I've just said, but I think what I'm looking for is what is people's experience with alignment of all of these values, and where can this go? And specifically with regards to the forest landscape planning initiatives.
Before you take a crack at that, Aaron, if you do, I just wanted to note the time is 12:56, so we probably have time for about one more question after this. And then for folks who have their hands raised or not, if you want to post that in the chat, then we can definitely address that after and send it out in an answer as well. But I'll leave Erin if you'd like to answer that question.
Yeah, thanks, Barbara, for the questions and the comments. Regarding the role and the impact of forestry in the watershed, the Shuswap Watershed Council has not had a big focus on that, and that's because we're keeping focused on the results of the research from UBC Okanagan that we did starting about 7 years ago. And that research really pointed to, fairly small areas of land along the Salmon River Valley Bottom and the Shuswap River Valley Bottom, where there's farms and there's homes. And so just thinking in terms of bang for buck, if we want to be able to do some restoration work, that's the area where we would see the most benefit for the dollar spent. And so that's been our focus. It's been a light touch on forestry to date, but it'll be interesting to see if there's going to be a conversation shift. We do have somebody, we have a representative from the Ministry of Forests on our council roundtable, and we also have someone who's employed in the forest sector who sits as one of our community reps. So there's a connection there, but in terms of our work and our priorities, it's been a light touch so far.
Thanks.
Great. And I see some questions in the chat, but I note, Emma, you've had your hand up, so we'll go to you for hopefully a brief last question, and then we can have some closing remarks.
Thanks. I kind of have a two-pronged question. If you can't answer all of it, that is fine. I think my first question, which is probably a more detailed one, is like you say that, like, from the methodology you described, I understand, like, you're looking at where different feeding sources into the river come from and what is the predominant activity in those areas. And so agriculture and urban inputs appear to be the biggest kind of contributors. But I do know I know that there are some methods that can be used that can actually identify whether certain nutrients are from animal sources or other sources. So I'm curious if any of that type of any of those techniques were used. And then my other question / comment, I suppose, is I know, like, if all of our producers, I'm from the BC Dairy Association, and hypothetically all of our producers should and are following the AEM code, all of the regulated setbacks and whatnot. And certainly the recommendations that are made are very in line with environmental stewardship in general. But from what I understand, there can be that legacy phosphorus can leach out, that maybe everyone's following the right methods and best management practices now, but maybe the legacy phosphorus from the last 20 years, there's leaching happening from before even someone who's maybe renting land was managing that land. So how do we, what are your recommendations for kind of addressing that, and for making sure agriculture is as sustainable as it can be without putting unnecessary burdens, I guess, on producers who maybe didn't play a role 20 years ago in that buildup?
Yeah, and on your latter point, we definitely are aware that that's going on in the watershed. So Andrea, I don't know how much time you'd like me to take to respond.
Just keeping it brief, and then we're closed. So yeah.
Okay. So the first part of your question was around methodology and the research. I wasn't part of the research team myself. I don't have those types of credentials. And I certainly was part of, I read their results, and we even produced sort of a layperson summary, which is what I showed on my slide. I'm not sure if the methodology looked at different isotopes of the nutrients or different molecular forms of them or not. I can point you to our website, though, where the full technical research reports are posted. It should be fairly easy for you to navigate to that page, but if you go to shuswapwater.ca, the menu on the left, there's an item for water quality research and reports. If you click on that link, it will take you to not only the summary that we produced, but the full reports from the research team. The second part of your question was around legacy phosphorus, and that's one of those, it's kind of an unfortunate thing where we know it's going to continue to have an impact possibly for decades, despite the new management practices that are in place and the new regulations. And so potentially the effective legacy P will offset how it appears that things are improving. And so I'm not an expert on farming and nutrient cycling, but I would say, from the P action plan standpoint, regenerative agriculture practices and anything to keep that P being used and not moving through the soil profile towards a creek or river.
Awesome. Thanks, Erin. And thanks for everyone who stuck around. I do notice that we've gone over time, but I appreciate all of the thoughtful questions and discussion that we've had. And again, for those who we haven't been able to address your questions, feel free to post those in the chat, and we'll work with Erin and Steve or myself to get a response to you folks as well. And we'll send that out to everyone who's registered, so they will not go unanswered. But yeah, we'd love for you folks to stay connected. You can also follow us on social media at Salmon-Safe BC, and this will be found on the Fraser Basin Council's YouTube playlist as a recording. And you can also visit our website for more information. Thank you to our funders and supporters, including you folks who come to our webinars and learn more about Salmon-Safe and the program more broadly. And we also welcome all feedback in any form. So if you'd like to scan this QR code, and Molly's also put it in the chat, it allows us to understand how we can better suit our webinars to meet your needs, and potentially take on requests for what you'd like to see in the future. So please feel free to fill that out, and we welcome it in any way. So thank you again, everybody, for participating in the webinar today. And to our speakers, Aaron, that was a fantastic presentation. And I know I learned a lot, and I hope that everyone else did as well. So thank you again. And we'll see you at our next webinar to be determined in the future. Thanks.